Hi guys, welcome to your video tutorial on sustainable design. Today we're going to look at why sustainable design isn't necessarily as simple as it sounds. So you've probably heard the word sustainability and sustainable design lots now. The last few lessons you've been looking at different products and the product life cycle and how they fit into sustainable design. But today we're going to kind of address a bit of what we call an elephant in the room, or, the thing that no one really says. And that is, our learning intention. It's around understanding that while, we're presenting sustainability in a pretty straightforward manner, sustainable design is actually a really complex problem, and it needs to be broken down a lot. And there isn't necessarily one correct answer. So to be successful today, you need to be able to do two things, guys. By the end of today's lesson, you need to be able to identify why sustainable design is a complex problem. So we're going to go through that, but you need to be confident as to why it is a complex problem. And you also need to be able to identify ways in which, despite its complexity, you can still design sustainable products and environments. Design isn't always simple, and many designers face obstacles or issues when attempting to design sustainable products or environments. So I know that we've presented for you, we've done a couple of lessons on what is sustainable design and renewable and non-renewable resources, and you've had a look at the product life cycle, but actually, in fact, sustainability is a relatively new concept. We've only started looking at it in the last, 20 to 25 years. So I know that sounds like a long time for you guys, but it's still a relatively new concept. And even some experts argue over what does or doesn't make something sustainable. So, it is a complex problem. And if you remember that product life cycle, there's a lot of interrelated parts that, one thing depends on another thing depends on another thing. It's kind of like a really complex Goldberg machine. I know probably some of you have probably seen videos of Rube Goldberg machines, but basically all the parts are dependent on one another. If you don't know what a Rube Goldberg machine is, let me just show you. It's this stuff. Oh, I'll unmute it. Basically, there's whole lots of parts that are all dependent on one another, and it's not always very simple. It's actually quite complex, just kind of like Rube Goldberg machines. So, there isn't necessarily one part that's more important than the other, and sometimes it's really hard to break down if something's sustainable or not. So it's not always simple. Let's have a look at our definition of sustainable design and the product life cycle, for example. So this is the product life cycle that we've been looking at, and what we've been asking you to do is part of sustainable design is considering all parts of the product life cycle. In the last few minutes, we've just proposed though that it's not always straightforward and simple. Let's look at an example of where it might not be straightforward. Here's two different types of lights. Okay, so we have a fluorescent light at the bottom, or a CPL light, and an LED light at the top. Now, most people's initial reaction is, oh, this one's way more sustainable, the top one, the LED light, because, it uses way less energy. And that's in terms of the product use life cycle. However, this fluorescent light down here is made up majority of glass, which means at its end of life, glass breaks down way easier than plastic. So I don't know which one's more sustainable, because, in terms of the raw material extraction and the processing for plastic, that's really bad. But, when I'm using it, it's way better for the environment. So which one do I pick? Which one's more sustainable? So how do I still design and pick sustainably? Well, you've asked a very good question. When we're looking at the LED light and when we're looking at this, and like the fluorescent one, for example, we have to look at really which one has the most impact on the different parts of the life cycle for which they are important. So how often do you use the light? Well, if a light was only a once use thing, I'd suppose wherever it goes in terms of its end of life would be really important, because if I only use it once and the materials take ages to break down, that probably wouldn't be as good. However, with lights, think about ask mum or dad, or think about how long you use a light for. Use it for ages and ages and ages and ages. Even though this fluorescent light might be better at the end of its life cycle, the energy saved using the LED light bulb will be way better in terms of product use, because both of these items here are used for a very, very long time. So while you could argue that this fluorescent light had a better end of life, I think the more important question is both of these two products are designed for use over a long period of time. The LED light bulb is way more energy efficient, so that's the more sustainable choice. So how do you design sustainably? Well, you look at the available options, and there isn't always, sometimes there's more than 2, sometimes there's 20 available options. It might be material for clothing, it might be material for furniture, it might be different types of flooring, depending on what you're looking at. You look at all the available options, and then you just make a judgment call at what option best considers the life cycle. So if we looked at these two products, when we looked at the life cycle, really it was all around product use, okay? Because that was the part of the life cycle for which these two objects, it was really important, because they're not single use, or they're not a few times use. They're actually used for quite an extensive period of time. So we looked at the product life cycle and made a judgment that the product use was probably the most important. And you just make a call. As long as you justify all of your choices and look at the bigger context, so look at the bigger problem that you're trying to solve here. With lights, it's really around energy efficiency, and energy efficiency is around use. Okay, so yes, I consider how I get these LED lights, and yes, parts of it are made of plastic, and that might not necessarily be all that great compared to the glass that this is made out of. In terms of what the light bulb's function is, its function is to provide energy and light. So really, this product use part of the life cycle is the most important. So you identify what's the most important bit, look at all the options and make a call. Then, as long as you can justify it, you're all good, okay? And then the third thing is depending on what you're designing, you'll be given a criteria for success. You have to work out what best matches that criteria for success. And that's what we're going to be looking at next lesson. So next lesson, we are going to have a look at criteria for success and what makes a design sustainable.